In a small suburban Chicago apartment, Gemma sat quietly, her cold coffee untouched, her somber gaze fixed on the snow falling outside the window. For 2 years, she had sent $9,000 to keep her family home warm, sacrificing every penny of her meager warehouse job earnings. But a sudden call from her father tightened her chest. "You don't need to come home for Christmas, Oliver's stressed and needs peace." Those gentle words cut like a knife, slicing deep into Gemma's pride. Why was she always the one pushed aside? What secret lay behind the favoritism toward Oliver? Under the gray, cold sky, Gemma felt a smoldering fire ignite within her, signaling a decision that would change everything. Would she continue to sacrifice, or stand up and claim what she deserved? Gemma set her coffee cup down, the ceramic clinking harshly against the wood in the silent room. She stood and walked to the window, where snowflakes swirled like fragmented memories. Each flake seemed to carry a moment she'd sent money in the dead of night, when her mother called, sobbing because the house was freezing, or when her father sighed over mounting bills. $9,000, not just money, but the meals she skipped to save, the nights her back ached after long shifts, the small dreams she shelved to keep her family warm through winter. Yet now, those sacrifices earned her only a cold dismissal. "Don't come home." Gemma clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms, as if to hold back the rising tide of anger. She turned back to the table and opened her laptop, the screen's blue glow illuminating her face, highlighting her red-rimmed but resolute eyes. The utility payment account loaded, displaying a long history of transactions: $300 in October, $450 in January, $600 in March. Each entry was a scar on her heart, a reminder that she'd always been the one in the background, quietly keeping the family home from being swallowed by darkness and cold. But this time, she wasn't looking for the Pay Now button. Instead, her eyes found a small, unassuming option in the corner: Cancel Service. Gemma hesitated, the cursor hovering over the stark red button like a warning. She closed her eyes, and memories flooded in. She recalled a winter 2 years ago, when her mother called at 2 a.m., voice trembling from the bone-chilling cold in the house. Gemma had sent $500 immediately, even though it meant walking through snow to save on bus fare for a month. She thought of Oliver, her brother, who never thanked her, only posting photos of lavish parties on Instagram while she worked overtime. She remembered her father's familiar sigh, always saying, "Family is family, Gemma," but never asking if she was okay. And now, they told her not to come home, all because Oliver, the one always coddled, always prioritized, needed peace. A tear rolled down Gemma's cheek, but she didn't wipe it away. Instead, she opened her eyes, and in that moment, she was no longer the obedient girl who nodded at every family demand. She was Gemma, tired of being treated like an ATM, yearning to be seen as a person with her own pain and dreams. Her trembling finger moved decisively and clicked Cancel Service. A pop-up appeared: Heating service for 315 Oak Street will end on December 1st. Confirm? Gemma took a deep breath, as if drawing courage from the chilly air of her apartment. She clicked Confirm. The screen went dark, and the room fell silent, save for the whistle of wind through the old window frame. Gemma sat motionless, feeling as though a heavy stone had been lifted from her chest, yet a strange emptiness lingered. She had done the unthinkable, severed the financial tether that bound her to her family, the tether she once thought was love. But now, she realized love wasn't one-sided sacrifice, nor was it allowing others to trample her self-respect. She stood and walked to the corner of the room, where a small space heater waited. She'd bought it last week with money meant for new shoes. She turned it on, its gentle hum filling the air as warmth spread, chasing the chill from her fingers. Gemma wrapped a thin blanket around her shoulders, sank into a chair, and for the first time in months, felt an odd sense of relief. Not joy, not triumph, but freedom, as if she'd stepped out of a stifling room where she'd been forced to be someone else. Outside, the snow fell heavier, blanketing the street below. Gemma thought of the family home on Oak Street, with its flimsy windows and creaky furnace. She knew the cold would soon creep in, bit by bit, just as it had crept into her heart over the years. Her parents would notice, then Oliver, that no one was paying the bills anymore. They'd call, text, maybe blame her, but Gemma had decided she wouldn't answer. Not out of anger, but because she needed to protect herself, to nurture the small flame of self-respect and hope burning within her. She pulled a notebook from a drawer and scribbled, "November 28th, I chose myself." The words were simple but weighty. Gemma closed the notebook and set it beside an old photo frame, her parents, and Oliver in a distant Christmas, when everything felt warm, when she still believed family was the safest place. Now, she knew true safety lay within her, in the boundaries she dared to set. Her phone buzzed, shattering the quiet. The screen lit up, Mom calling. Gemma stared at it, heart racing, but she didn't pick up. She let it ring, then go silent, just as she silenced the expectations that had once bound her. She stood, brewed a cup of hot tea, and sat by the window. The snow kept falling, steady and unrelenting, as if whispering that winter would be long. But Gemma wasn't afraid. She'd found her own warmth, and this time, she'd keep it for herself. Questions lingered in her mind. What was Oliver hiding? Why was her family so quick to push her aside to protect him? Gemma didn't know, but she sensed a secret waiting to be uncovered, one that might explain the wounds she'd endured. For now, though, she wasn't in a hurry for answers. She just wanted to live, truly live, in this small apartment, where she alone decided what mattered. On the first day of December, as Chicago sank into biting cold, Gemma's phone began to buzz incessantly. A text from her mother came first, brief but laced with panic. "Gemma, the heater's not working. Can you check on it for me?" She stared at the screen, her finger grazing the words, but didn't reply. Setting the phone down, she returned to the novel she was reading, a story of women who dared to leave their pasts behind. The wind howled outside her window like a lullaby, soothing her heart, which had long been conditioned to rush to her family's aid. But this time, she chose silence. By the third day, the messages grew relentless. Her father sent a long one. "The house is freezing, Gemma. Your mom's wearing 2 sweaters. This isn't the time to sulk. Call back now." The familiar tone, half command, half plea, assumed she was still the obedient little girl. Gemma read it, lips pressed tight, but felt no sway. She opened her laptop and checked her bank account, a meager balance, but for the first time, she wasn't haunted by someone else's bills. She bought a fresh loaf of sourdough, a luxury she'd once denied herself to send money home. Biting into the warm, fragrant bread, she realized this was the taste of freedom. Oliver, as expected, didn't stay quiet long. On the night of the 5th day, an Instagram notification popped up. He'd posted a photo, feet in thick socks beside a dead fireplace, captioned, "When family turns their back, the cold isn't just outside." The post quickly racked up dozens of comments, his friends offering sympathy, some even tagging Gemma, calling her selfish. She scrolled through, her heart stinging briefly, but not from shame. She saw Oliver painting her as the villain in his story, conveniently omitting the $9,000 she'd sent or how he squandered money on failed startup ventures. She turned off her phone, slipped an old jazz record into the player, and let the smooth saxophone fill the room, drowning out the invisible accusations. On the 7th day, her mother called repeatedly, leaving a trembling voicemail. "Gemma, the house is down to 40 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what's going on. You've always been the one to fix things. Please call back." Her mother's voice, once a warm breeze in Gemma's childhood, now only widened the unbridgeable gap between them. She listened to the message but didn't call back. Instead, she bundled up and walked to a small cafe on Clark Street. Sitting by the window, watching people hustle through Christmas preparations, Gemma sipped a hot mocha, feeling reborn. She was no longer the one chasing her mother's tears or her father's disappointed glances. She was Gemma, and for the first time, she belonged to herself. But her family didn't relent. On the 10th day, her father sent a chilling text, "If you don't restore the heat, don't blame us for not considering you our daughter anymore." The threat cut like a blade, but Gemma didn't flinch. She saved the message, not to respond, but as a reminder, these were the people she'd once put above everything, and this was how they repaid her. She thought of Oliver, his just this once loans that vanished into glitzy parties. She thought of her parents, always shielding him, always saying Oliver needs time, while Gemma got perfunctory nods. The truth crystallized: she wasn't family to them, but a tool, valued only when useful. Back in her apartment, she turned on the heater and dragged a chair to her small balcony, where snow blanketed everything. Chicago was frigid, but Gemma felt an odd warmth within. She wasn't gleeful about her family's suffering, nor was she sad for choosing herself. She was learning to live without needing validation from those who'd made her feel invisible. Another text came from Oliver, short and venomous. "Congrats, you've ruined everyone's Christmas." Gemma read it, then deleted it, refusing to let it disturb the peace she was building. She thought of his post, the accusations, and wondered, what was he hiding? Something in Oliver's tone, in her parents' panic, hinted they weren't just worried about the cold. A bigger secret lurked, and Gemma knew it would surface eventually. She went to the kitchen, cooked a pot of pumpkin soup, its sweet aroma wafting through, softening the edges of painful memories. As she ate, her phone rang again, her father. She let it buzz, then silenced it. She didn't need to hear more manipulation or explain her choices. They'd feel the cold, just as she'd felt their emotional chill when they excluded her from Christmas. But unlike them, Gemma had found her own way to stay warm, not with money, but with self-respect. She opened her notebook, where November 28th, "I chose myself" still stood like a vow. She added, 12/8, "I still choose myself." Each word was a step forward, a brick in the wall guarding her heart. She looked out the window at the twinkling Christmas lights from a neighbor's house and smiled. Winter would be long, but Gemma wasn't afraid. She'd learned to stand firm, and no matter what Oliver's secret was, no matter how her family tried to pull her back, she wouldn't turn around. This small apartment, with its humming heater and echoing jazz, was her home, not Oak Street, not her family, but herself. Gemma had learned to live in her own silence, letting the accusatory texts and manipulative words from her family dissolve into Chicago's icy air. Her small apartment, with its humming heater and smooth jazz, became a sanctuary where she rebuilt the self-respect her family had trampled. But she knew her silence wasn't the end. The cold in the house on Oak Street, where her parents and Oliver huddled, would soon force them to confront her, not over the phone, but face to face. And Gemma wondered, when that moment came, would she see remorse in their eyes, or just the desperation of people who'd lost their provider? And what secret about Oliver, hinted at in his venomous words, would finally come to light? On the evening of December 23rd, as a blizzard swept through Chicago, her apartment's doorbell rang, sharp and urgent. Gemma, sitting by the heater with a cup of ginger tea, flinched. She walked to the door, peered through the peephole, and saw her father, his coat dusted with snow, face gaunt, eyes a mix of anger and worry. She took a deep breath, cracking the door just enough to let the room's warmth spill out, contrasting the frigid hallway. "Gemma," he said, voice hoarse, his breath forming white clouds, "we need to talk." She leaned against the doorframe, hand gripping the knob, her voice calm but icy. "Now's not the time, Dad." But he didn't back down. He stepped closer, almost forcing her to open the door wider. "You cancelled the heat, Gemma. The house is at 40 degrees Fahrenheit. Your mom's coughing all night, Oliver's, he can't handle it. What are you doing?" His words were an arrow, but Gemma didn't waver. She met his gaze and replied, "I didn't cancel anything. I just stopped paying. You told me not to come home for Christmas so Oliver could have peace. I did exactly what you wanted." Her father froze, lips twitching, but no rebuttal came. He repeated, weaker, "It was just a misunderstanding. You know your mom's frail, how could you leave her like this?" Gemma opened her mouth to respond, but a figure appeared behind her father, stopping her heart. Oliver. He stood there, dark sweater-soaked, hair matted with snow, eyes red from cold or something else. His presence was a jolt, as if the boundary she'd built had been pierced. "Oliver," she gasped, voice faltering. Her father turned, clearly startled, but Oliver ignored him. He stepped forward, voice trembling with rage. "Who do you think you are, Gemma? Canceling the heat, letting us freeze? You're destroying everything just because you weren't invited to Christmas?" She stood stunned, but before she could answer, Oliver collapsed into a sob, his voice breaking. It's my fault, okay? I took $20,000 from Mom and Dad's savings for a startup. I told them not to invite you because I was afraid you'd find out. I was wrong, Gemma, but you can't punish everyone for my mistake. The confession hit like a tidal wave, sweeping away Gemma's defenses. She felt breathless, as if every wound she'd endured, nights of overtime, skipped meals, being cast aside, converged in this moment. Oliver, the brother she once admired, hadn't just used her, he'd made her a scapegoat to hide his failure. Tears blurred Gemma's eyes, but she didn't let them fall. She stepped forward, opening the door wider, letting her father and Oliver see the warm apartment, its glowing heater and the faint scent of freshly baked cookies in the air. You're wrong, Oliver, but not for taking the money, she said, her voice as cold as the snow outside. You're wrong for thinking I'd always be the one in the background, paying for your failures, $9,000, 2 years, and not one thank you. Then you all told me not to come home, like I was nothing but a check. She turned to her father, voice hardening. You want me to fix things? Fix it yourself. I've done enough. Oliver sobbed, but Gemma didn't soften. She closed the door, the click resounding like a declaration, leaving her father and brother in the freezing hallway. On December 26th, as the snow stopped falling, the doorbell rang again. This time, it was her mother, in a thin coat, face hollow from illness. Gemma opened the door but didn't invite her in. Her mother looked at her, eyes red, and said, I'm sorry, Gemma. I was wrong to always protect Oliver, to let you carry everything alone. Yesterday, he told me, he called you a walking bank. I didn't know, but I'm to blame for not seeing. Her mother's apology was a gentle breeze, brushing Gemma's heart but not enough to melt the ice she'd built. She stood tall and replied, Mom, I'm not angry. But I'm not the daughter you knew anymore. The wounds you're talking about? They're scars now. I'm not going back to that role, ever. Her mother nodded, tears streaming, then turned away, footsteps heavy in the snow. Gemma closed the door and returned to the heater, where the fire still danced. Oliver's confession echoed, but it no longer hurt. It was proof she'd been right to set boundaries, to choose herself over endless sacrifice. She opened her notebook and wrote, 12/26, I don't belong to them anymore. The words were a promise, not just to herself, but to the future she was building. Outside, Christmas lights twinkled, but Gemma didn't need them to feel warm. She found her own light, and though Oliver's secret was out, though her parents might try to pull her back, she knew she wouldn't turn back. This apartment, with its warmth and peace, was home, not Oak Street, but the place where she was free to be herself. The day after Christmas, Chicago plunged into a deep freeze, with temperatures dropping to -10 degrees. Gemma no longer checked her phone obsessively, but she knew, through updates from her cousin Lily, the only family member still in touch, that the cold on Oak Street had become a harsh reality. Lily called one morning, her voice laced with concern but free of judgment. Gemma, Oliver moved out, she said, the wind whistling through the phone like it was telling the story. He fought with your parents after coming back from your place. He's crashing at a friend's now, but I hear it's not great. He lost his job after his startup crashed completely. Gemma listened, gripping her hot tea, unsurprised. Oliver had always lived like the world owed him, and now, without her to lean on, he was facing the consequences of his own making. Lily continued, her voice softer, your parents, they sold Grandma's wedding ring. The silver one with the pearl, remember? They used the money to buy heating oil, but it'll only last a few weeks. They're in a smaller apartment now, near the highway. The Oak Street house is up for sale. Your mom said they can't afford to keep it. Gemma closed her eyes, picturing the ring glinting in the living room's glass cabinet. It was a family heirloom, worn with pride by her grandmother, now just an online listing priced at a few $100s. She didn't feel glee at her family's collapse, but she didn't feel guilt either. They'd chosen to favor Oliver, to overlook her, and now they were paying for that bias. She opened her eyes, gazing at the snow piling on her balcony. Thanks for telling me, Gemma said to Lily, her voice steady. But I'm done getting involved. Lily let out a soft laugh over the phone, a rare warmth in the frigid winter days. I know, Gemma. I just wanted you to know the truth. And I'm proud of you for standing up. Not everyone has that kind of courage. The call ended, and Gemma sat quietly, feeling as if she'd been validated by someone outside her immediate family, something her parents and Oliver had never done. In the days that followed, the silence from her family became absolute. No more texts, no calls, no accusations or pleas. Gemma realized that after their failed attempts to pull her back into her old role, they'd given up. She stayed off social media, but Lily mentioned that Oliver had posted a long rant, calling himself a victim of family misunderstandings, without mentioning the money he took or how he'd excluded Gemma from Christmas. The post got a few likes but mostly indifference. The world, it turned out, didn't revolve around Oliver as he'd thought. Gemma only shrugged at the news, feeling an odd detachment. Her brother, once the center of every family decision, was now a fading figure in her mind. She began spending more time on herself. One afternoon, she wandered through the Christmas market on Division Street, buying a deep green wool scarf, something she'd once deemed a luxury when sending money home. She wrapped it around her neck, feeling its softness, and smiled. Her apartment, though small, now brimmed with her personal touches, a new bookshelf, a potted succulent on the windowsill, and a painting she'd done herself, clumsy lines but full of meaning. Each item was a reminder that she was living, not to fix others' lives, but to build her own. One night in late December, as Chicago sank into dark, icy stillness, Gemma got a text from Lily. Gemma, your mom's in the hospital with mild pneumonia. Not serious, but she's weak. Your dad's managing, but they don't mention you. Thought you should know. Gemma read it, her heart twinging, but not with guilt. She thought of her mother, who once sang her lullabies, but also stood by as Oliver called her a walking bank. She thought of her father, who chose to protect her brother over valuing her. She typed back, thanks, Lily. I hope Mom recovers soon. But I can't do more. She sent it, then turned off her phone, letting the room fall silent except for the heater's hum. Gemma stepped onto her balcony, breathing in the biting air. She looked down at the snow-covered street, where lights from other homes twinkled, and felt a profound peace. Her family was unraveling, not just from the cold, but from the choices they'd made, the priorities they'd misplaced. The Oak Street house, where she'd once played in the yard, was now a distant memory, like a faded photo. She didn't hate them, but she no longer waited for them to change. She'd let go, not out of bitterness, but because she knew that sometimes, to live true to yourself, you have to let others face their consequences. She went back inside, opened her notebook where her earlier words stood, I chose myself. She added, 12/30, I have no regrets. The sentence was an affirmation, not just of her decision, but of who she'd become. She looked in the mirror, seeing a new Gemma, not the quiet girl who sacrificed endlessly, but a resilient woman ready to move forward, no matter how harsh the winter. And in her heart, a question lingered, would they ever realize she'd been the flame keeping their home warm? But Gemma smiled, knowing the answer no longer mattered. She'd found her own light, and that was all she needed. January draped Chicago in a thick blanket of snow, as if trying to bury the traces of the old year. Gemma woke early each day, not because her warehouse job demanded it, but because she wanted to savor the dawn, when pale light slipped through the curtains, illuminating the succulent on her windowsill. She brewed coffee, its rich aroma filling the air, and sat at her small dining table, jotting down new plans, not for her family, but for herself. An online painting course, a short trip to Lake Michigan, a new armchair for her reading nook. These small dreams, once sidelined for others' bills, now took center stage in her world. Her modest apartment had become a true sanctuary. She hung a self-painted canvas, clumsy strokes of a flower field under a sunset, on the wall, and each glance at it brought a smile. She bought books, from romantic novels to meditation guides, and spent evenings curled in a blanket, letting stories whisk her to new worlds. The heater's hum blended with saxophone melodies from an old jazz record, creating a soundtrack of peace. She no longer checked her phone for family messages or scrolled social media to see Oliver's latest victim narrative. She'd severed the ties to old dramas, and for the first time, she felt alive, truly alive, not to please anyone else. One late January afternoon, Gemma walked to an old bookstore on Halsted Street. The scent of aged paper and polished wood enveloped her as she stepped inside, and she picked a book about women who left their families to reclaim themselves. The shopkeeper, an elderly man with a kind smile, recognized her. "Winter girl," he called her, "looking for another story to keep you warm?" Gemma smiled, nodded, and as she left, she felt a new connection, not to her family, but to the wider world, where she could be whoever she chose. Her cousin Lily still called, not to update her on family matters, but to share everyday stories. "I just burned an apple pie to a crisp," Lily laughed over the phone. "But I bet you'd do better. When are you inviting me for dinner?" Gemma chuckled, a clear sound she rarely heard from herself. Soon, she promised, and for the first time, she considered opening her apartment to those who truly valued her. Lily, with her sincerity and lack of judgment, had become a bright spot, reminding Gemma that family isn't always blood, it's those who choose to stand by you. Gemma began to see the deeper lessons of her journey. She once thought family love meant unconditional sacrifice, putting others' needs above her own. But now, she understood that true love starts with valuing yourself. Setting boundaries wasn't selfish, it was how you protected the flame within, keeping it from being snuffed out by unfair expectations. Oliver's confession, though painful, had clarified things. She wasn't a walking bank, but a woman with dreams, pain, and the strength to rise. She no longer sought her family's validation, because she'd found it in herself. One early February night, with Chicago locked in -15-degree cold, Gemma sat by the heater, opening her notebook. Her earlier entries, "I chose myself, I have no regrets," stood like milestones. She added, 2/3, "I am enough." The words weren't just an affirmation, but a vow to herself that she needed no one to validate her worth. She looked out the window, where snow fell silently, blanketing the street. Lights from neighboring homes twinkled, but Gemma no longer yearned to belong elsewhere. This apartment, with its painted canvas, succulent, and lingering coffee scent, was home, not an address, but the place where she was free to be herself. She thought of her family, not with sadness or anger, but with a gentle release. She didn't know where they were, what they were doing, or if they ever saw her as a daughter, a sister, rather than a cash source. But those questions no longer gnawed at her. She'd learned to let winter pass without shivering, not because she had a heater, but because she had resilience. She smiled, set down her pen, and played a new jazz record. The trumpet's notes rang out, like a greeting to the future, where Gemma would keep writing her own story. As she stood to brew tea, Gemma caught her reflection in the mirror. She saw a woman who no longer bowed to manipulation, who didn't live to fix others' mistakes. She saw Gemma, strong, free, and whole. Chicago's winter might linger, but she knew she'd endure, not just because she'd found warmth, but because she'd become her own flame. And in that firelight, she saw a simple truth: sometimes, to find your light, you must walk through the darkness of those who once called you family. Gemma stood by the window, the twinkling Christmas lights no longer stirring pain but sparking faith in her freedom. From a cold coffee cup in her Chicago apartment, she found the flame to warm herself, not for her family, but for her own dreams and worth. Her story reminds us, loving yourself isn't selfish, it's how you live fully. Will you rise like Gemma, or let others' expectations dim your light? Like, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to explore more inspiring stories. Your support is the wind that fuels our creative flame, helping us bring deeper content to life. Together, let's spread lessons of self-respect and freedom.